Okay, now welcome to the next topic of floods. So first of all, we're gonna look at the causes of floods. So what is a flood first of all? A flood happens when there's too much water in the wrong place. The main causing of flooding is heavy rain, but environmental factors and human activities also can increase the effects of the floods. So first of all, the number one cause of flood is unusually heavy rainfall. So most floods are caused by rivers that burst their banks because of too much water. Let's say on a sudden day, all of a sudden there's too much rain, and then the dams are not able to hold the levels of water that would have risen on that day, and then when they burst, it causes flooding, right? So the extra water comes from heavy rainfall over a period of time during storms. Tropical storms, for example, hurricanes, cyclones, or typhoons bring lots of rain, which causes flooding. And heavy rain can cause lakes and dams to overflow, flooding the surrounding land. The second cause of flooding is poor farming techniques. So if farmers or cattle remove all the vegetation in an area and there's lots of rain, the ground will flood and the soil will wash away if there are no longer plants to protect the soil. Right. One of the ways that farmers can reduce the impact of flooding is to practice contour farming. Contour plowing involves plowing in the land from side to side across a slope, not down the slope, but across the slope, rather than from bottom to top of the slope. So if the farmers plow from top to bottom, the water will have an easy path to flow down the slope, taking the seeds, the plants, and topsoil with it, and then flooding the area below. The third cause of flooding is loss of vegetation. Remember, the vegetation is there to hold the soil and also to prevent water overflowing, right? So the loss of vegetation and deforestation can indirect causes floods. When trees are cleared from forest areas or burned by fires, soil erosion can result. This is because the roots of the trees help to anchor the soil and hold it in place when the rain comes. Without these roots, the topsoil will get washed away by the rain. And the eroded soil settles at the bottom of the rivers and dams or blocks the path of water, which raises the water level, and more flooding occurs as the dams and rivers cannot store that much water. And then the fourth cause of flooding is settlements. Right. In cities and towns, much of the surface consists of concrete, tar, and roofing materials. Less water can sink into the soil, which then increases flooding. Because the water is not able to seep into the ground, so it has to flow in an area or in a path where it's easy to flow in. And then eventually it will accumulate in certain areas, causing flooding. So in areas where there are trees and grass, most of the rain water soaks into the ground and only a little goes into the river. Another cause of flooding is tsunamis that are caused by earthquakes. Remember when you talked about earthquakes, that it can cause the rise of water in oceans, right? So those two tsunamis are huge waves caused by earthquakes under the sea. When these waves wash up on the shore, they cause flooding. In 2004, Indian Ocean earthquake occurred on December 26, 2004, with an epicenter off the coast of Indonesia, setting several tsunamis. Over 230,000 people in the 14 countries were killed, and it flooded coastal areas with waves up to 30 meters high. It was one of the deadliest natural disasters in recorded history. So, what happens when there are disasters? The effects of floods, right? So we need to look at the three different aspects that are affected. We have the environment, we have the economy, and we have human beings, right? So when you talk about the environment, we talk about what happens to the soil erosion, right? The rivers burst their banks, right? The land becomes flooded, trees, plants, and animals die. dams overflow, washing away land. What happens to the economy? So the economy, we're talking about money, right? So if there's damage to the fields, it means all the crops would have been destroyed. So it means the farmers would have invested their money in in the fields are not going to get anything from it. So they would have lost money. There's damages to buildings. The country has to rebuild those buildings again from scratch. There's damage to infrastructure. You're talking about your roads, your bridges, your power lines, your railway line. There's loss of property by can be your house, your cars. There's loss of crops and farm animals. There's looting and theft because why? People will be starving and hungry due to the loss of either their property or their businesses or even the little that they have. And there's high cost of repairing and building. There's forced closures of farms, mines, and factories. Okay, now let's look at the aspect of humans. Right, there's loss of life. Either people get, hurt, or they lose their lives. Right, people are not gonna have enough safe drinking water because crops would have been destroyed. There's going to be famine. Diseases like cholera are going to spread because why? They are waterborne diseases. There's going to be displacement of people from their homes because why? The areas that they were living in are flooded and then they're not able to stay in those areas. Um, Other kids lose their parents, right? And they become orphans, right? They're going to be evacuated from the areas and then people are going to be forced to live in refugee camps. Okay, so now let's look at the aspect is as to why other people are at much risk of being areas in their areas being flooded than others. Right, right. So first of all, you need to look at why, like what areas get flooded most of the times. So we all know that the low-lying areas are the areas that are flooded first before the water starts rising. Right. So people who live next to the rivers often experience floods. So that is why you always hear about people, our government telling people to not to go and stay um, in the areas that are easily flooded, right? Millions of people across the world live next to the river. The reason why they live next to the river is because they want a fresh supply of drinking, washing water, and also water for cooking. They need water to keep their soil fertile and make their crops grow. And then the land next to the river is usually flat and easy to build on rather than the area that is up, high up ground. And then there's not enough suitable land in other areas. And also the other thing that people live next to the rivers is because they do not have enough money to live in areas where there's no risk of floods. Right? When you're talking about there's no risk of floods, it's because living in an area like above a mountain, you're going to need a lot of money for you to be able to level that ground before you even start building. Right? So it's going to be expensive for them. And then also it's going to be very far away from modes of transport. Right. Let's move on. So where people are most at risk. So catchment areas. So catchment areas, we're talking about areas like dams and rivers. So when it rains heavily, these areas are quickly flooded, right? And then areas with high water tables. When you talk about high water tables, so if you ever seen like if you go to other places, you just need to dig a little bit for you to reach water, but in other areas you have to dig deeper. So areas with high water tables um, tend to be flooded so easily. Slopes of the hills. So hill slopes become flooded easily if they're not given proper drainage systems, right? And then inadequate or absence of storm water systems, right? If the area that you're living in doesn't have proper drainage system, that is to take away those extra water that would have rained, then those areas are going to be flooded. And then we said low-lying areas also are going to be more prone to big waves, right? Due to storms cause the areas to be flooded, and then global warming also is causing the sea levels to rise. Because why? The Antarctic, where there's that area that used to have ice, are melting. Here's a case study of the Gange rivers. Floods almost every year when the snow melts in the Himalayas and the heavy seasonal rainfall. Because there are so many people living in the areas that flood, many people are killed when the river floods. So what is it that we can do to reduce the chances of people being killed by floods? So people can prepare for and limit the damage caused by floods by doing the following. First of all, there's channelization of rivers. So making the river courses deeper, wider, and straighter. The reason why we do that is because we want to prevent overflooding of the rivers. Another way is to construct levees. So levees are building long earth mounds along rivers and banks to stop them from flooding, right? To prevent flooding by controlling the flow of water. So if you look at the image here, you can see that the soldiers have what they have done. It's next to a river. They've put sandbags so that they are extra high. Also, another way to prevent flooding is to use good farming methods, right? That is, when plowing, you need to make sure that you're plowing across the slopes, right? It can help prevent flooding by also controlling erosion, contour plowing, not overstocking land with too many animals because why? They're going to overgraze or to feed on too much of the grass, and then when it rains, there won't be any grass to stop the rain from seeping into the ground. Right. So what can we do also to prevent flooding? Is to avoid farming and living along floodplains or riverbanks. Because why? They are easily flooded. Take out flood insurance to deal with the losses of flooding. You need to be able to monitor the weather in order to focus or to warn or evacuate people in flood risk areas. And then another thing is to look after your wetlands, which are natural flood controllers since they act like sponges, right? Improve your drainage system so that the water can flow away quickly, and then teach people about floods. So, what are the benefits of flooding? So, if there's flooding, there's going to be accumulation of water in our dams, right? Right. We've come to the end of the lesson.